Welcome to Deep Dive, everybody. This is an online webinar hosted by First Things First Okanagan, where we explore a different climate solution each month. I'm Sue Kirschman, for those of you who don't already know me, and Laurie Goldman is on the controls. Our organization is fortunate to be located on the unceded traditional territory of the Syilx Okanagan Nation. We value Indigenous ecological knowledge and worldviews, and one of our guiding principles is based on the Indigenous concept of caring for the next 7 generations. Although many of our group's climate goals are short-term, we're trying to get bylaws changed or prevent new fossil fuel infrastructure from being built, etc. But we always have the long view in mind to protect and improve the environment for the generations who will follow. Our topic tonight is green roofs with guest speaker Christine Thuring. And we've talked about roofs before in the context of solar panels, but tonight we'll hear about another use for this important part of our real estate. Christine will cover new and emerging roofing technologies that can play a significant role in improving livability, suppressing fire, cooling the urban heat island, and saving money. Green roofs are sustainable alternatives to conventional roofing. They're nature-based solutions, and they can benefit biodiversity and bolster climate resilience, as well as mitigating stormwater and reducing urban heat. Dr. Christine Thuring is an ecologist who's passionate about biodiversity and healthy communities. She's worked with green roofs since 2001, doing installation, design, maintenance, advocacy, education, and research. And she's the principal of the business Ecotone, and co-founder and executive director of the Green Roof Infrastructure Network of BC, which is also known as GRIN. While Christine's speaking, if you have any questions, you can just type them into the chat and we'll have a little moderated Q&A afterwards. And just a reminder, you don't have to copy any links and resources that are entered into the chat. We'll be including those in a follow-up email, and we send one after each of our events to all registrants, along with a video recording that we encourage you to share with others. So Christine, I'll turn it over to you now, and thank you so much for being with us here tonight.
Thank you for that introduction, Sue, and the invitation, Laurie. And first things first, Okanagan. Very happy to be here. Now let's see if this works. Can you see my screen in a good way? It's full screen and all that?
Yes, it's great.
Okay, great. Well, let's get right down to it. Thank you so much for the introduction, Sue. This is a rough outline of what we're going to cover tonight. I'm aiming for 20 to 30 minutes. And yeah, we'll see how that goes. So I'm actually calling in from Coast Salish territory where I live. I'm in North Burnaby, the ancestral lands of the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Musqueam peoples. Really grateful to be in solidarity with my host nations and really trying to practice those traditions in my own way, and always learning, of course. So I just want to acknowledge that this presentation is the result of a lot of people's good work. Yes, I've been working with Green Roof since 2001, but many of my colleagues listed here have been working with them for a long time too. This is me on a green roof in India, which I managed to get onto without money. I did not bribe, but I did get on. So quick introduction to GRIN. Just so you know, we are quite a young nonprofit. We're an interdisciplinary network with the aim of building a network between anyone and everyone who's interested in healthy water, healthy people, healthy biosphere, with an emphasis on the built environment. So there's different things that we do. We sort of started off our bread and butter, as it were, is green roof tours, followed by happy hour. It's a good model. So that qualifies as education and outreach and also networking. But we also do presentations such as this or at conferences, symposia. We're planning to do a series of webinars this year, and we're also planning to revitalize the Green Roof courses that formerly were offered by BCIT. We also, the first point, I sort of jumped ahead, we try to cultivate Green Roof champions. So in the picture, those are some of our local Metro Vancouver Green Roof champions. Those are some great councillors from the different municipalities here who are interested in green roofs. So our aim there is to cultivate them, support them as they explore the policy levers that they could implement within their communities, help them to remove barriers by empowering them or any Green Youth champion with the information that allows confident arguments to address information, misinformation. And of course, we also try to fill information gaps through research and other work. So the best way to get involved at this point is to join our mailing list. The link is there. I'm sure we'll put that in the chat later. And I've also got a QR code for those who have QR readers on their phone. That'll be on the last slide. So that's an intro to GRIN. So let's get into the content. So first, the term resilient has a lot of currency these days. It's used quite a lot. So I thought it might be useful to just explore what does resilience mean and actually what's a roofscape as well. So resilience is basically the ability of a substance to spring back into its original shape, the capacity to withstand or recover quickly from difficulties, a certain toughness, maybe even grit. And a roofscape is basically the view of the rooftops of a town or city. So when we talk about resilient roofscapes, it's sort of like a bird's eye view of how that roofscape could be resilient or not. And so perhaps to open up properly, it begs the question, well, why do we need resilient roofscapes? The reason is that roofs have occupy a huge surface area. And of course, the buildings beneath them account for a lot of energy consumed in every town and city around the world. In short, the roofscape has impacts. This is just a aerial view of Vancouver. I'm sorry, the photos are a bit Vancouver centric, but I do have some images of green roofs in the Okanagan too. So we're talking about impacts. Look at all that hard surface. Much of it is roofs. And so let's look at what are those impacts. Conventional roofs or typical roofs have impacts related to energy consumption and thereby greenhouse gas emissions, but then also flooding, drought, heat, pollution in lots of different areas, fire. And to be clear, we're talking about conventional roofs in the sense of typical roofs, the roofs that we most commonly see in our areas. And of course, the reason this is a problem is that our roofscape is expanding. So I was doing some work in Kelowna with regards to resilient roofscapes in particular, because of course that is an Okanagan city that is growing very rapidly. So I took this excerpt from the climate projections for the Okanagan region from 2020. Just think that was before the heat dome. But basically, our population is growing. Of course, in the Okanagan, the population is growing very rapidly. And what that means, just by default, is more roofs and more associated infrastructure, which is generally hard infrastructure. And of course, that is matched by climate projections that are becoming more extreme, especially in the Okanagan. So that's an overview of the impacts. So what is the actual issue? Can we break that down? So conventional or typical roofs basically have one function, right? It's just to waterproof, to provide waterproofing for that building. So the issue is that they break down when they're exposed to the sun and to the elements. And so within 20 to 30 years, they need to be replaced. Their breakdown leads to toxic byproducts because they are hydrocarbon based with lots of other things in them. And so these are some of the impacts that we're going to look at in a little bit of detail in the next section of slides. We're going to look at it through the lens of data that was collected on a green roof research facility in Vancouver. So while the data will be coastal BC, um, in general, the results are similar to results from most parts of the world, and so they will be relevant to a certain degree in the Okanagan. Obviously, the ideal would be we actually had data in the Okanagan, which we don't at this time. As you can see, though, this research roof had two green roofs. One was really shallow, just 3 inches. One was quite deep at 6 inches. And in the center was a reference roof, or which is a conventional roof, a very popular roofing assembly that is quite dominantly used in BC. It's a 2-ply SBS system for those roofers out there. So let's look at those impacts through the data. And I'm just going to breeze through here, so don't get overwhelmed. I'm hoping to, again, keep that bird's eye view to a certain degree. So this graph shows the 4 seasons: winter, spring, summer, and fall. And on the y-axis, going up the side, is the heat flow. So that's basically heat entering and leaving the roof. So the red is the conventional roof, and the green and the blue bars are the two different green roofs, the 3-inch and the 6-inch. And as you can see in every season, the conventional roof is either losing or gaining a lot of heat, regardless of the season. So this heat flux, as we can see on this monthly graph, so every month of the year is shown here with that same heat flux going up the y-axis. The red bar, that's the conventional roof. And you can see, and you can also imagine, in the summertime when it gets a lot warmer, there's a lot more heat flux. But even in the winter months, there's still a lot of heat. So in that case, it's heat leaving the building. Of course, in the summer, that has implications on air conditioning and impacts on the grid for energy use to keep the building inside cool. So another impact, I mentioned waste, pollution. So that relates again to the membrane being exposed. It's not protected. The conventional roof is not protected, whereas green roofs obviously protect the membrane. They're on top of the membrane. So I mentioned before that exposure to UV and to the elements, and things like hail and freezing and daily heat from the sun. That's what actually breaks down the waterproofing. Um, so conventional roofs have an average lifespan. Sorry, I shouldn't say 10 to 15 years. It's more like 15 to 30 years. Um, and these graphs here show the y-axis here is temperature in degrees Celsius. So 0 is the black line, so that's freezing. And then you can see the temperature fluctuations over the course of the day. So the conventional roof on the left, the red line, that's the maximum temperatures, and that's over the course of a year. So you can kind of see, obviously, in the summer, the max temperatures are quite high. They're actually up to 60 degrees. The minimum temperatures, even in the peak of summer, kind of hovers around 10 to 5 degrees centigrade. So that's a big fluctuation that's happening every single day. And that's combined with UV rays from the sun. That's what really breaks down that material. Look at the shallow green roof, just 3 inches, and that temperature fluctuation is much reduced. It doesn't even get over 30 degrees under that shallow depth. So that's really reducing landfill waste, if you think about it, by extending the lifespan of the waterproofing. In fact, so here's again a seasonal graph showing median daily temperature fluctuations of that membrane. So again, the y-axis is temperature, where the highest temperatures on the reference roof in the summer were 48 degrees centigrade. But look at the green roofs in that summer, 5 degrees, 1 degree. It's like the median membrane temperatures. So those membranes are really well protected from those temperature fluctuations from the sun. And as a result, we've got this estimate that waterproofing under the green roof have 3 times more lifespan than conventional roofs. which is worth a lot if you think about it. It's a lot less waste going into the landfill. And this table is from the General Services Administration from the US government. This is a federal um, group who did this summary comparing green roofs with black roofs. So black, um, I can't remember the exact kind of roof, but often you see black roofs. So it's that type of waterproofing, um, and its membrane lifetime in years. So it's just a summary of different analyses that have compared lifetime or lifespan of membrane, either under a green roof, a black membrane under a green roof, or just exposed. And you can see that the age differences are quite distinct. Um, and in Switzerland, where they've got some really old green roofs, and I should have said as well, I'm of Swiss heritage, so I spent a lot of time in Switzerland, and I know a lot of the green roofs there. There's this one green roof, it's over 100 years old, and that membrane is still intact. It's also home to many species of orchid that aren't found anywhere else in the country anymore. So yeah, green roofs are really great in those ways. Um, the impact of water is also a major um, issue with conventional roofs. So of course, because they're hard surfaces, when it rains, that water just immediately goes down the drain. Yes, Lori, I'm seeing your gesticulations there. It's true. Huge impacts on surface water quality. Salmon are, we know now the impacts of stormwater and of the SPP quinone chemical that comes off of tires. So when we're flushing loads of stormwater into our stormwater drains, there's issues on surface water pollution, fish mortality, also combined sewer overflows, which then, of course, leads to gastrointestinal illnesses. Um, the graph here shows rainfall at the very top, those little black lines, that's a rainfall event. And then runoff are those two peaked lines. The conventional roof is in the red circle, and you can see that runoff basically follows the rain event. So it rains, the roof produces runoff, the rain ends, the roof stops producing runoff. In that green circle with the dotted line, that is the performance of a green roof. You can see that runoff is much delayed. In fact, runoff really only begins after the rain event has ended. So that delay is really valuable for um, stormwater infrastructure, especially when it's combined with sewer infrastructure. It's a major factor to reduce combined sewer overflows having green roofs. And of course, the volume is reduced significantly as well. So green roof technology of this modern sort that we're talking about came about in Germany in like the 70s and 80s. And that country has a burgeoning green roof industry. This is an example of the Mercedes headquarters near Stuttgart. And you can see how that entire site is vegetated, including the roofs. They've got detention ponds, which you can kind of make out, and all the roofs are vegetated. And it's partly because that city offers stormwater credits. So that company doesn't have to pay into their stormwater fees. So it's actually a cost saving method for them. And so, of course, many people will think like, okay, well, that's great in places like continental Europe, but what about here? Certainly on the coast. Again, this is data from the coast, Pacific Northwest temperate rainforest. So just to give you a sense, even so, about how greeners perform in this climate down here on the coast. So you can see in the dry months, so May through August, basically there's very little runoff coming off of those roofs, and that's really valuable, again, because of the combined sewage overflows and beach closures. Um, but even in the winter, in that wet season, the green roofs are still generally retaining more water than the obviously the conventional roofs. And so if we take a sort of a mean between 90% reduction in the summer and 15% reduction in the winter, we get about 30% reduction stormwater. So it's still worthwhile, still functioning. Another impact that I know we're all probably still maybe even traumatized by that heat dome we had several years ago now. That relates into urban heat island. And urban heat island, as this graph shows, is basically the heat re-radiated by the built environment, both during the day and after the day has after the sun's gone down. Whereas plants actually transform the sun's heat through evapotranspiration. So if we don't have any plants or soil or moisture in our cities, it just gets really, really hot. And of course, the heat in our region in general is getting more and more. It's increasing with what's happening with climate change. So this is actually a really important thing to consider. I'm giving the example of the city of Tokyo, which is, of course, a very big metropolis. And that city actually, their first Green Roof Incentive program was focused entirely on urban heat island mitigation. So this thermal map here sort of gives you an impression of, where red, you can see it aligns with the motorway and with the building. And look at the effect of that urban park there. It's called Roppongi Hills. Closer look at that, and you'll see this is actually a department store. This Roppongi Hills. And there's yeah, it's a multi-layered uh department store with lots of trees and green roofs and yeah, just a massively vegetated complex, very biophilic. Okay, and then of course, top of mind for many is the risk of wildfire. And a really interesting thing about green roofs is that they can actually suppress fire and extinguish embers. This kind of goes contrary to what a lot of people think, but I'm going to show you why that is the case. And just to say that, um, the fire rating for conventional roofs doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to stop a fire from spreading. There are, I'm not going to get into that technicality because we're going to focus on green roofs. So green roofs suppress fire. How does that work? So this is some research that was done at the University of Montreal in partnership with Suprema, is a waterproofing and a green roof company. Basically, they found and they validated a lot of other research out of Germany. There is a fire standard for green roofs, like it's a very well defined function that green roofs can protect the roof, building, and the neighborhood from fire propagation. So even if there is a fire, the composition and the depth of the growing medium will protect the building. The growing media tends to be largely mineral, which means a spark can land there, but it's not going to have anywhere. There's no fuel for it. And then you'll notice the inset of the plant. That's a sedum, which is a succulent plant. You're probably familiar with them from xeriscaping gardens and also cliffs, and they're stress-tolerant plants, very fleshy. And as you can imagine, if an ember lands on them, they're just water, basically. I've actually heard someone say that sedums will pop when they get too hot, so they function as like mini sprinklers. So needless to say, green roofs suppress fire and extinguish embers. And one last point about this as well. This is an image of a post-fire landscape with a wetland. Um, and you can just see the effect of that hydrated land. The same principle applies to our cities. There's actually a sponge city design concept, which is championed by a Chinese landscape architect, Quan Jing, Konjian Jin. It's really wonderful. Just Google sponge city design and it'll pull up beautiful images of what's possible when we basically restore our cities with plants and soil and water. And of course, there's benefits to biodiversity and cooling as well. Okay, so that's sort of like how green roofs perform by contrast with conventional roofs. And so as you can see, if roofs cover 20 to 40% of the built environment, then that's really good real estate that we could use to improve the conditions of the built environment. So these five roof systems I'm going to present, they can be combined. And in some cases, I even emphasize the combinations. But these were identified specifically for the Okanagan. So, so here's one of my green roof in the Okanagan. This is built in Naramata. Um, so green roofs are just one great system. Um, they can be quite shallow. They can be very deep. The extensive green roof systems are the shallow ones. They require less irrigation than the roof gardens. But generally, to enhance establishment, it's good to provide irrigation. And of course, that's then a bonus for fire protection and that hydration. So to the argument that it's too expensive, we could counter that with it's too expensive not to install green roofs. So in other regions, the return on investment for extensive green roofs could be 5 to 6 years. For intensive roof gardens, it could be 1 year. And that's of course because of the value, the real estate value. Again, we don't have numbers for the Okanagan. This table below just kind of gives a flavor of some of the many co-benefits that green roofs provide all at the same time. So public and private benefits. And that multifunctional simultaneous delivery of these benefits is what makes them so powerful, so potent. So you can see they're beautiful spaces. They're great for biodiversity, um, urban agriculture. So many different ways that we could use the roofscape. The next obvious roofing technology is solar PV roofs, and it sounds like you recently hosted a talk about that as well on a deep dive. So, of course, solar is a great form of electricity. The prices are really going down. Um, I guess prices here aren't as low as they are in other parts of the world because of the tariffs that Canada places on imports. But yeah, it's a really great means of increasing renewable energy generation on site, decentralized. For rooftop applications, though, the kind of roof that solar panels are placed on determines how efficient they are. So you can see at the bottom here, we've got a white colored roof, which is going to be a lot cooler. I'm actually going to get to cool roofs later. And the top image shows a green roof solar combination, which you'll remember the plants cool the atmosphere, so they're going to cool the panels. And indeed, this seemed worth recommending green roof solar as a roofing combination of its own right, because when combined, these two technologies actually enhance each other's performance. It's actual synergy, like by definition. And actually, in Europe, where they're decades ahead of us here, integrated installations are becoming quite common, and that's because of all the research and development that's happened there. There's integrated systems on the market, like the ones shown in the picture here. And actually, you might note in this picture that these are bifacial photovoltaics, so they are vertical, which really enhances their efficiency. It also allows more light through to the plants. So keep your eye on that. I think they're on their way here too. So green roof solar, there's actually been a lot of research recently just looking at which roofing type, roof assembly is most efficient for solar power generation. And across all the studies I've looked at, whether it's comparing PV panels located on top of black, gravel, cool roofs, or um, green roofs always generate the most electricity for photovoltaics. Okay, the fourth of five is blue roofs. So blue roofs, blue kind of gives the impression of water, right? So blue roofs are strategic, optimized, and dynamic water management systems. So in this case, water is temporarily detained on the roof, and there's either a passive or an active flow control device. So as you'll imagine, this captured and stored water has public and private benefits. you're reducing runoff. You can reuse that water for non-potable uses like irrigation or flushing toilets. There's cooling, which also reduces energy savings and reduces the urban heat island. Um, Through the evaporation, we can improve, we can restore the water balance or restore the hydrological cycle. Utility cost savings, and if that water is available to the sky, then it can serve as water for birds and insects, so benefiting biodiversity. So this kind of gives you a rough idea of one example of a blue roof. It's a highly adaptable design. Like I said, water can be open to the sky, or it can be concealed under the amenity space of a roof garden. Um, and it's worth noting that these are actually an alternative to below ground detention tanks. So many buildings might be specified with below ground detention tanks to manage their stormwater. But of course, that's going to take up several parking spaces. And it does nothing for cooling, and it's highly engineered and requires a lot of maintenance and care. Not to say these don't require maintenance and care as well, but again, the co-benefits are so much greater here. And then the last resilient roofing technology is cool roofs. Uh, so they're called cool roofs. They're basically white roofs, whether they're painted or actually white in material. And the idea is that they radiate or reflect thermal heat away from the building into space. Unfortunately, if you're a neighboring building and that light reflects into your building, then you will capture that heat. So it's not very neighborly. Um, this technology is best suited for warm climates and southern cities that lack cold winters. So perhaps not the most appropriate for our climate, where it does get quite cold. And yeah, in terms of what the science says about cool roofs, there was an analysis that suggested that cool roofs will actually cost a lot more money due to the heating penalty, and that's what is happens in the winter when that roof just loses loads of heat. Other studies that have looked at compared different roofing technologies have generally ranked cool roofs the lowest because, of course, their only benefit is that cooling benefit. They don't do anything for stormwater or biodiversity. Um, and maintenance-wise, of course, they have to be kept very white. So they also require attention and maintenance. So you might think, great, well, what's holding us back then? Why aren't they everywhere? So the fact is that because there is a greater upfront cost, political will and leadership are essential. There are still barriers in place. And so, new developments or projects would really benefit from guidance or recommendations or practice guides. And on top of that, the market and the industry actually require investment and support. Um, there are many policy levers and programs that are really useful to incentivizing or promoting these kinds of technologies. I won't go through them in any detail, but just to give you a flavor, there are some towns and cities in Canada that have incentive or policy programs. Uh, the city of Toronto is probably one of the best actually in North America, at least right now. It's got a green roof bylaw and an eco roof incentive. So that city is really having a burgeoning green roof industry, lots of green jobs, lots of green roofs. And this is just a visual of downtown Vancouver that shows that mandates work. So in that red circle there, you can see that massive cluster of green roofs. Those are all the green dots. That is the Olympic Village. So that is a LEED Platinum community. Every building has a green roof, and so it's mandated to have a green roof. And you can just see like, well, that's they really mandates work. And then, of course, investment and support for market and industry would certainly help to move it forward, especially if we are preparing for zero carbon 2050 or really want to embody the UN SDGs. And of course, green jobs need training. These are professional jobs. So it could be that, maybe the world is fine and we don't need a better world, but why would we not want, energy independence and healthy habitats and sustainability green jobs, clean water and air, etc. So maybe it's just the right thing to do. There aren't really any negative consequences from investing in green roof policies and mandates and installations. So that's all I've got to say. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Below, you'll see how to get in touch. There's that QR code. If you have a QR reader, you should be able to just sort of like capture it, and that should connect you with our mailing list. And that's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christine. That was really exciting. I found it really exciting. We only have a couple of questions for you. One is, um, how would something like these work in our semi-desert climate like we have here when we get little rain? Like last summer, we had very little rain for a lot of time. And then, can you install a green roof on a slanted surface?
Mm, great questions. Yeah, so in terms of water, um, one thing that comes to mind is that gray water is almost like an endless resource. It could well be that perhaps we just need to get a bit more creative with how we manage our resources. Certainly, we don't want to tap into the lake needlessly. At the same time, it would be really good to have a hydrated landscape. So that's one thing I would recommend. And there's some cities around the world that are very arid. I know Israel's done a lot of work, and Melbourne, Australia specifically, finding that actually irrigating their landscapes, preventing them from going into dormancy, is worth it. So there is a lot of wastewater around. Could just be that our water narrative needs refreshing.
Okay.
And sloped roofs, no problem. There are anti-shear barriers to keep those systems in place. Basically, there's no limit to how steep you can do a green roof. Just if it gets too steep, it'll be called a living wall.
Of course it will. And there's another question from Sue about the weight of the product sitting on the roof. And what about building code changes to handle that kind of weight? And how does that impact construction costs?
Yeah, great question. So generally, we could say an extensive green roof or a shallow roof, like the ones shown in this picture, or like that Naramata one. It's probably about 25 pounds per square foot. And so actually a lot of roofs that already have slab on top or gravel, that's a pretty easy retrofit. It will already have been structurally designed as such. Otherwise, if you are building a new build, then you could just integrate that into your design. So that's I suppose an easy answer. Um, yes. Was there
So,
another?
yeah, we have another one. What about insurance? How do insurance deal with these kinds of situations as a weighty roof?
Yeah, it's a lot. Everyone always asks about insurance, and it's true that especially in BC, the insurance industry um uh has an interesting relationship to any form of overburden on a roof. But the fact is that many companies will insure green roofs, so it's just a matter of finding the company that actually will provide that insurance.
So I'm having trouble reading these little tiny chat things. Um, so Henry's asks, how can he convert his 4-year-old?
Flat roof into a green roof without exceeding the available load capacity. Hi, Henry in Caledon. Um, so I guess the first thing you'd need to find out is what the structural capacity is. Um, Again, like if it's got pavers on it and it's already that's one thing. But if it's a shingle roof that doesn't seem to have been designed with a great structural capacity, then you'd need to get a structural engineer in to look at it, or B, um, yeah, actually, no, that's what you would need to do first before anything else.
Thanks. I can read now. The next question is, what are some native species besides the sedums that can be grown on green roofs in Coast Salish territory? So this is on the west coast. And well, answer that one first and we'll go to the next one.
Sure. Hi, Shayla. Yeah, I believe that's Shayla from the Coast Salish Native Plant Nursery, where I've done a lot of volunteering myself. So, in addition to sedums, actually, bulbs are excellent. So, nodding onion, camas, even brodeas. Bulbs are great because, of course, they avoid drought. So they're spring wildflowers, and yeah, those are good. Also, many of our bunch grasses are actually well adapted to these kinds of conditions. Um, so if you imagine like a habitat template, imagine like a coastal bluff or the Gary Oak ecosystem, not obviously with the oaks, but the meadows, where the very shallow soil, very exposed. So there's a lot of species that are pre-adapted to these kinds of conditions. I'm happy to talk about it with you offline too.
And so that would probably be kind of similar if we were trying to do something like that here in the Okanagan, just to find things that wouldn't have really deep roots and would be drought tolerant.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah. And actually the growing media can also be designed for the vegetation that you're wanting to support. So if you want like a native plant community, it's probably not going to be very water intensive anyway.
Mhm. Shayla also asks if it's more difficult to do a vertical green roof on the side of a building, what would be the important design considerations?
Yeah, right. So a vertical green roof or living wall. So the main design considerations there are just that gravity is a relentless force. So I think I've heard someone say that living walls are like green roofs on life support. Irrigation is really, really important, and it has to be consistent and can never break. So in that regard, vertical walls. Those are obviously that's a crucial point is just making sure you've got a really rigorous irrigation system. Probably like many people use smart timers, so you actually get a notification on your phone if something happens, if something breaks. Um, and otherwise, of course, like a green roof, a living wall is also going to be interfacing with the building envelope. So it's really important that that all the detailing is good, that it's correctly done, so that the waterproofing is 100% intact, and that the building itself won't have any water ingress.
Margaret asks regarding insurance, are there any tips to get the roof accepted? Are there any ways that we could help the insurance company to know that this is a safe installation?
Hmm. That's a good question, and I have to say it's not my personal wheelhouse. Like I've not engaged in that anywhere. I know some of my board members are here, so Karen or Kathy, if you wanted to maybe put it into the chat if you have a good answer for that. Um, yeah,
Robert from Corona also says that there they need structural permits to add solar panels, so maybe it would be the same requirement for putting on something like a green roof.
yeah, no doubt. It's definitely going to be. It needs to be permitted for sure.
Kenzie asks, what would be the underneath part of a green roof if you were putting something on, let's say to a shopping mall or something, or a house? What would be the underlay, the barrier for that?
So underneath the waterproofing, what materials are used as the underlayment or waterproofing?
Underneath the green, the material that the plants are growing in, what
Got
would
it.
you
Yeah.
on the surface of the structure. She's thinking, she wants to do this on a new garage. And so what material would she put on the roof before adding a medium?
Right, right. Yes, and I do apologize. I didn't show like the typical like the cross section. Because a green roof is a series of layers you can imagine. So if the plants are the top layer, and then you've got your growing medium, and then you may have a drainage layer, you may have a moisture retention layer, you may have a root barrier, then you have your waterproofing. So every building is waterproofed. So for your garage, for example, um, it's a new garage. So that means when you build it, you're going to put a brand new waterproofing on. So what you could do is just obviously make sure that it's installed to perfection, and then you can put the green roof over top of that, depending on what your structural capacity is.
Um, Nicole says that she heard about the IGA in Quebec that had a farm on top of it, and I've heard of that too. We all got very excited about that. Are there any more that you know of, and do we have any in the West?
Yes, I know. What an amazing project. That's a Suprema project. So I mentioned Suprema earlier. Yes, and it's huge and it's really impressive. I don't believe we have any others in Canada. There's a really famous one in New York City called Brooklyn Grange. Also really amazing facility. Um, but yeah, just uh I don't I'm guessing, I don't actually know, but my guess is that that rooftop farm would have been integrated into the building design right from the beginning.
Uh,
Definitely requires forethought.
yeah, because you would require a lot more medium to handle that kind of production, wouldn't you?
Exactly, yeah. And like people moving around, right? Like you want to have all the fall protection, the roof safety, probably also having water availability and yeah, access, all these different things, which is obviously going to ramp up the price. So like a very simple extensive green roof like the ones in this picture are generally not accessible. They're accessed maybe once or twice a year by the maintenance crew to just make sure that everything's okay with the plants. But it's not a place to go and grow things or to even sunbathe.
Um, that's great. And Vesna is in Saskatoon, and she's asking what type of vegetation could be used to design a green roof in the prairie cities when we have 5 to 6 months of severe winter with significant snow.
Ah, great question, Vesna. And actually, you should get in touch with Michael Moreno. He's in, I think, Saskatoon. And in fact, one of our board members, Goya Nan, she did some green roof designs in Saskatoon. I know she used bunch grasses. I know this because one of the pictures that she shared shows the green roof in the winter, and that's like it's really beautiful. Um, so I can't tell you right now because it's not my eco region, but I can tell you that it's possible, and maybe you want to get in touch with Michael. So feel free to maybe just join our mailing list, and then I'll contact you or send me an email on the email there, and I'll make sure to connect you.
That's great. Thank you so much. Um, Robert in Kelowna or Penticton says he has a technical question. The structural engineering companies you could recommend that work with this process because he'd like to get in touch with one, but maybe
Mm.
he could contact you by email to get that specific information.
Yeah, please get in touch, Roberto. I'd love to connect with you too.
And Ria asks, can you put a tree on your green roof?
Yes, trees are possible. It just depends on the structure beneath. I mean, you saw that picture of the Roppongi Hills in Tokyo, like that's all trees.
So they would need deeper medium.
That's right. Yeah, they'd need deeper media. Their root ball would probably be lashed in with like belts. So, to really to protect them from wind uplift. They would also be placed in places where wind uplift is the least. So there's a lot of thought that goes into it to be sure.
Well, Karen has a very long comment there. Like any insurance, the key is to demonstrate that the risk is low. So engage with an architect who's familiar with green roof design. That's not easy. We'll have to contact you guys. use high quality green roof products, experienced contractor to install, and that'll improve the chance to convince the insured the green roof is well designed. And so I think we can include your contact information in the follow-up emails, and people who are interested in researching this more can contact your organization to get some feedback and support.
Yeah, thank you so much, Karen. And I know anyone that has that interest, definitely reach out to Karen directly. She put her email there, and this picture actually is one of her projects.
Fascinating. Um, Noreen asked if you know anybody in Kamloops who are doing green roof projects.
I do not. However, I was just at a Green Roof conference in Toronto, and I met two faculty from TRU Kamloops, and they just finished sort of a restoration of a green roof on TRU campus there. But yeah, they're not doing green roof projects per se. But I would really like to build an interest group for Okanagan Green Roof. So maybe if you're interested in kind of connecting with like-minded folks in the Okanagan, send us an email, maybe with that in the subject heading, and maybe we can actually start some snowflake organizing.
A wonderful idea because it also can spur the communities, the councils to mandate more of this kind of construction when they are getting developers to come in to say, listen, we need to have this because our towns are too hot. And we have to require that everybody has this, and we're going to give you some kind of a incentive maybe to put that in. And if we do have more people in the community asking for this, that's more power to get it happening.
Totally, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's again cultivating green roof champions. Like we can't do the work. I can't do the work from here, but I definitely want to support Kamloops residents, Penticton, Kelowna, to be equipped with the questions that they're gonna have to field, so they can do that with confidence. And also just again building that community of like-minded people.
Wow, that's it for questions. All of these links or resources will be provided in the email that we send out with along with the link to the recording. Really appreciate this so much. Thank you so much, Christine. I learned.
Okay. Thank you so much. And I just noticed Karen put some links in the chat of other green roof farms and other things too. So definitely check those out. Thanks, Karen. Great to meet you all. Thank you so much for having me on.